In this session, we have the team from Bastien Shine who will cover working with media and influencers. Bastien Amplify works with many of Australasia's most loved brands to develop PR, social media, content and influencer strategies that drive impact. Joe James heads up Bastien Amplify, Bastien Shine's PR and social media team. Food and beverage is a specialist area within the team, looking after clients from Tip Top and Kapiti through to Campari brands. Joe will share insights and advice on how to work with the media and influencers, driving more engagement through social media. Dylan Fraser-List is a creative with many years in the advertising industry in content creation and social media. He's worked with both local and global clients in food and beverage and other sectors, and some very well recognised brands. Dylan will cover off the process from start to finish when it comes to content creation for your food and beverage business. Joe and Dylan.
Right, PR. What makes a good story? So these next few slides, I'm just going to cover off 10 or 11 different kind of bones that make a good news story. Some of this will be really obvious. Some of this will be stuff that you probably just didn't realize makes a good news story. So firstly, is it of public interest? Is anyone actually going to be interested in the story that you've got to tell them? If the answer is no, there's probably something you need to do there. Secondly, is it relevant? And thirdly, is it new and novel? So is it a new restaurant? Have you got a new chef? Do you have some innovative new ingredients that you've used to launch a new dish? Do you have a popular dish on your menu that sells out on a daily basis? All of these things are really interesting from a news perspective. And then lastly on the slide, is it timely? So today we're in the world of social media, and journalists especially are constantly on social media, and quite often these days that's how journalists are finding their news stories. So if you've got a story to tell, make sure that you're pitching it as soon as you can, so it's new news when a journalist hears it. Next slide. And then next, is it going to create impact? So will your story actually impact a number of people or affect a number of people? And then next thing to think about, is it good news? So in the current environment, there's obviously kind of a lot that media can choose from that errs on the negative side in terms of a news story. For news media, negative stories often really help with things like click-through rates, etc. So I think newsrooms today are really, really mindful of that, and so they're actually proactively looking for positive, good news stories as well, and so this works in all of your favour. What can you think about? So think about milestones with your business. Have you been in business for, do you have a decade, a 20-year anniversary coming up? All of these things can be really kind of interesting stories for local food journalists that you might not have thought about. Does it educate? So is your story telling the readers something about the world around them that they didn't already know? And lastly, in New Zealand, a sure winner for a story is often a celebrity element. So, is there? I think there was a story in the paper the other day of a bakery that Jason Momoa frequents with the current show that he's filming in West Auckland, and the business owners had basically uploaded a receipt of Jason's typical order for the entire crew, and I think there was a day where the shoot couldn't go ahead that day for weather reasons or what have you, and he still put through that order and basically gifted everything in that order to the local community and the local schools to keep that business going, and immediately got picked up as a story. Next slide, please. Visuals, and Gillian wanted me to hit this home really hard. Visuals can break or not a news story. So I think the power of visuals is something Dylan will talk through as well, but whether it's a still image, whether it's a piece of video content, that old adage of a picture really does make for 1,000 words sometimes, and I think with what all of you do in terms of the food and beverage sector, there is no shortage of ideas in terms of great visuals. So this image here is from the Guardian's 2022 Food Photographers of the Year Award. It's from the Ritz, and it shows the drama and theatre of what goes on and how they build a food experience in their restaurant. Is it a cracking yarn? So is it a story that you can imagine someone going and telling their friend after they've read it? And then also, is it weird? I think with food, there's no shortage of wonderful, weird angles. I might have heard a little inkling into some of the cool new flavours that Garage Project is about to release, which I won't talk about now, and that's got kind of PR news value and social media value written all over it, so I'm excited to sample those later. And I think a really good example, I think, that encapsulates all of this really well is, I used to work at Tourism New Zealand with Gillian actually, and a number of years ago we took an Australian media famil to the Hokitika Wild Foods Festival, and what we did was we set up a dining table for the host of one of the Australian travel shows, and we served him on fine china, bull's testicles, and fine silverware that he had to cut into, which then had stuff oozing out, and then he had to eat it on camera. So I mean that's a great example of a weird story that had a hugely visual element, that had a cracking yarn at the end of it that he would have definitely gone home and told his mates about. Next slide, please. Right, so you've basically crafted all the bones of a really, really good story. Now, what do you do with it? So first tip is to actually think about a set of media that are going to be interested in your business, and get to know those media really, really well. Learn about what sort of stories they write about, what makes them tick, and show that you really know and care about what they write about, so that when you go to them with a news story, it's actually relevant to them. Next, just like any important person to your business, build a relationship with this key set of media that you want to work with going forward. So get to know them, organise coffee meetings, lunch meetings. If you can pitch a story in person, that's really going to help your chances going forward of other interesting stories that you might want to get in touch with them about at a later date. Be really crisp with the details. So a well-crafted pitch is really, really important, and try and get them on the phone first. And it's amazing. I've seen this so much with my career. It's almost like sometimes when my team is ringing a journalist, they don't expect them to pick up the phone, and then they do pick up the phone. So my tip is to just write your pitch down and make sure that you've got all the key bits of the pitch, and leave the minor, less important bits of the pitch, leave it out, because you've probably only got a few seconds before they hang up on you. So it really is your elevator pitch and your chance to kind of sell in a story very, very quickly on the phone. And phone is just my number one tip to get to a journalist, because in a newsroom, as you can imagine, these guys and ladies are basically probably receiving thousands of emails, press releases, PR pitches, and unless it's from a name they recognise, it's got a really strong, interesting subject line that gives them a clue as to what their email entails, they're probably unlikely to open it. So if you've done all those things, you've met them in person, you've got them over the phone, you've got your pitch across, make sure you follow up by email, because journalists are busy people, they're working on whatever their next deadline is, and if you've got a story that's interesting, but it's not really important till next week, they're probably going to forget about it. So follow up by email. Next slide, please. Right, vetting media requests and influencer requests. So I would imagine that a lot of you in this room are probably reactively hearing from people that call themselves food journalists or food influencers quite regularly, asking for a free meal or free product. And so it's probably, sometimes you may not know how to kind of vet them and figure out if they're credible. So just a few tips on how you might be able to do that. Firstly, do they have a legitimate email address that's associated with the publication that they say they're from? Secondly, ask them for previous examples of these stories so you can actually check the quality of what they say they can do for you. Next, you can also ask them to share with you written confirmation of if an editor has commissioned them to write a food story, because actually a lot of food writers in New Zealand are freelancers and they're not permanently employed by a certain media publication. So how a freelance journalist works is they will get paid a story commission by an editor who says to them, yes, I'm going to pay you a certain fee for this type of story. And so you can absolutely ask to see that in advance. Next slide, please. Right, so a few tips on social and how you can up your social media engagement. You probably know this, but social these days is really your digital storefront. So around half of Gen Zs and millennials are now turning to social platforms like Instagram and TikTok over and above Google when they're looking for their next meal. It's a really cost-effective way to reach new audiences and also, importantly, to build trust, engagement, and interactions with the audience that's important to you. Next slide, please. I think when we're time poor, what we can often sort of forget to do is just that really upfront strategic planning when it comes to social media. So I think another tip for today is, even if you try and create a social strategy that's just on one page, that's really going to help you remember what you're trying to achieve on social, figure out who your audience is, figure out the types of content that are going to engage your audience, and it's essentially your document that you can kind of keep checking in on a monthly, quarterly basis in terms of how your social content is tracking. Slide, please.
Cool. So there's no point being on social if you don't know the audience you're going to and you're not doing it effectively as well. You're just posting for the sake of posting, and that's no good. So you've got to really identify your audience before you get to making any sorts of content. And that can be tricky sometimes because you might not know it, you might have a sort of idea, but you've got to figure out which content resonates with which audience. So you've got to ask yourself a few different questions, that being like who? Who is the audience? Do you know who they are already? Do you have to go out and find who they are? That sort of thing. What is the content that they want to see they're going to like get them going or bring them into your restaurant or buy your products? Where? Like which platforms are they on? Are they on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn? Where are they? And go find them. And as well, why are they going to stop their scroll to look at what you've got and then follow that up with actually being there? Next slide. So again, maybe you don't know. So what do? You go find out. And it's all about, if you want to hit the next slide, it's just about testing and learning. There's definitely, you might have a sort of idea, so you might do a little content, see how that goes with the audience, see if they like that. But don't be afraid to fail. Be open to, let's try this out, let's post this content, let's test this new platform and see how we go. Is this what we like? Is this what is working with our audience? Next slide, please. And you can kind of gauge that with a few different things that you might see. Thinking about your engagement, like your numbers, your likes, your shares. Are people looking at this? Are people stopping? As well as like your reach. Is the algorithm picking up your content and firing it through to other people because this is really quality content that's resonating with the audience? Is the sentiment positive? Are people liking what they're seeing? Are they tagging their friends? Are they saying this looks amazing? Or are they kind of, maybe? And the taste, it's important, like, yeah, you might find your audience, but it's also got to be, you got to feel it as well. It's got to be right for you as the creator, as the business owner, and it's got to be what is suited for you, how you like it. Next slide. And so the different platforms, there's a few others as well that we're not touching on as much, but these are a few of the main ones that we really like to use. Instagram is definitely refined, but it's also snackable as well. You're thinking about those like first 3 seconds on all these platforms you have to capture that audience's attention and really keep them around. It's a mix of both stills and reels, but we are finding that right now the video content is getting a lot of uptake by Instagram. They're loving trying to compete with TikTok, so their reels are really, really important at the moment. So it's really important to be doing some video content as well as stills. And then it has got that slightly younger skewed audience. Facebook, you can really focus on engagement here. There's so many fun mechanics as well to do that, and it's a really nice way to have like a two-way dialogue with your audience as well. And it's stills, it's video, and you can do those copy-based posts as well. So there's all sorts you can do there. And TikTok is mostly video content. There's photo slideshows, but the main thing is the video, the video pieces. And it's all about, it can be a little more unpolished because it's about being authentic, and that younger audience isn't really all about seeing everything super clear and super beautiful and polished. They like to see something that's a bit more real and a bit more honest, and it is that younger Gen Z audience. So it's, and again, got to be really fast paced. Those first 3 seconds are really key to capture the audience. You've got to hook them in. Next slide. So finding which one is for you, you've got to like try them all. Different creatives, different platforms, and then you get different results as well. And these platforms are all each different from each other as well. So it's not about, in some cases, recycling the same content on each different platform. Sometimes you've got to make the effort to do something a little bit different that's going to differentiate it and then help that algorithm to pick it up. And you know, the more places you can show up effectively, the better it is, because you're just building that audience bigger and bigger.
Thanks. Right, so just continuing on and going into a few more specifics from Dylan's slides. Social, as Dylan's mentioned, each platform is really, really different. So best practice is to really create content that's platform first. So producing something for Instagram is probably going to be a different process to producing something for TikTok or for Facebook. Each social platform has really different specs, so it's really important to know those specs, and when you're shooting the content up front, ensure that you can capture the content that's going to work for the end specs for whatever platform your content then needs to go on. So the specs change all the time as well, so this is a just really quick snapshot of some of the average typical specs on commonly used social platforms right now. Learn about the current algorithms for each social platform. So again, these are also changing because social media platform businesses are constantly chasing their advertising revenue and are constantly tweaking the algorithms to encourage you to spend more money on their platforms. So right now, for example, Instagram is prioritizing Reels. So our recommendation at the moment is that when you're looking at your Instagram content, you probably want to have about 60% of your content geared towards Reels, video Reels, if you can. The other really important thing is plan for sound off. So most social platforms have an automated sound off setting. So make sure that you're thinking about things like subtitles, and also when you want to tell your audience to turn sound on, because sometimes the sound is obviously really crucial to a video. So all of this is apart from TikTok, which is sound on, and actually audio is a really important component of TikTok, and there are lots of different audio tools which the platform has built in for you to make that editing process a lot easier. Next, vary your content. So learn about what types of content is available on each platform. So it might be reels, it might be stories, it might be stickers, it might be polls, and then also think about the types of content that you can start to think about and vary through your own content creations. That could be a how-to video, a recipe guide, an interview with a new local food producer that you haven't heard of before. And also keep your brand cues subtle. I think a really important point to remember is when people are on social, they don't want to feel marketed to. It's their space. They decide how they curate their own feed. They choose actively who they want to follow, and and when they are served content that isn't something they wanted to follow in the first place, that can feel like a real intrusion of their own private space. Next slide, please. Another really important point that I want to share today is quality over quantity. So if you read about social media best practice, you'll probably hear recommendations on minimum number of posts that you should be thinking about each week. Our recommendation is actually to throw that out the window and think about quality over quantity. So your audience is going to appreciate seeing a single post from you on a weekly basis that adds something, gives them some value, instills an emotional reaction, whether it's a laugh, it's a tugging at the heartstrings, rather than seeing something on a daily basis that you're just putting on your social channels for the sake of filling your feed. Next slide, please. Next, word count counts. So you'll often see captions these days that are really, really long. So typically the word count limit on social media captions is 125 characters, in some cases words. And to read the whole thing, you've got to click a see more button. And if you're honest with yourself, when was the last time you clicked on a see more button to read the full caption? So the point here is get your point across really succinctly. Next slide. Social. This is a really important thing to remember. It's a two-way channel, so people don't want to be marketed to on social. So it's really important to essentially behave like your followers would behave. So engage with their content, like and interact their content. If they've commented on your post, comment back. If they've asked you questions, respond to their questions in a really timely manner. So there are lots of tools to help you do that and make it easier for you these days. So Meta Business Suite has a saved replies function where you can actually fill in all of your commonly asked questions and some saved standard replies, so that when you're going to answer questions, you've got them all saved and they're consistent when you need to reply. Next slide, please. Right, so working with food influencers. So this is really an extension of social media these days. Influencer marketing, particularly in the food space, is crucial. And I think probably a lot of us in this room can point to a handful of food influencers that we follow and love and rely on for food recommendations or the next restaurant that we want to go to. How do you actually work with food influencers? I'm sure there's probably, again, no shortage of people trying to come to you and ask you for things. But actually, what I would encourage is for you to be proactive and work out the food influencers that are going to matter to your business and the ones that you proactively want to work with, rather than waiting for them to just come and ask you for something. So firstly, what are your goals with influencer marketing? Do you want to reach a whole bunch of new people? Do you want to increase or drive sales? So all of those will mean that you might work with a slightly different set of different influencers. Another really important point is to learn about the Advertising Standard Authority. So New Zealand actually now has some rules around how influencers can and can't share content. So when you're working with them, it's really important that you're kind of working to those ASA guidelines and you're not in breach of any of those rules. And then the three R's of influence are relevance, resonance, and reach. So hopefully those are make it easier to remember. So relevance is basically is the influencer posting content on their feed that's relevant to your business. So if they are an influencer that is really into classical music, they're probably not going to be interested in all of a sudden posting a whole bunch of food content. Resonance. Do they actually get a good amount of engagement on their content? And so a really kind of quick tip to assess someone's current engagement rates is to look at their last few posts, look at the amount of likes they're getting and also the amount of comments they're getting per post, and then to work out average engagement rates, typically what you do is take the number of likes and the number of comments that they might get on a post, and then divide that by the number of people that follow them. So what we say is a typically good engagement rate for an influencer is 1.5 to 2%. So if they're getting that amount of kind of likes and comments, it's usually a good indicator that that's probably quite a good influencer to work with. And then reach, do they have a decent following? And not just a decent following, because that's not always the end game. Do they have a following that's relevant to your business? So can you kind of look through the types of comments they get, and can you tell that they're people that live locally, for example, is probably what I'd be looking at. And then once you've figured out a set of influencers that you'd ideally love to work with, reach out and start actually engaging with their content. So rather than feeling like a brand who's just come in out of nowhere and requested something, start liking their content, start interacting and commenting on their posts, and then often influencers that are open to collaborations will be quite upfront about sharing the best ways to get in touch with them. So sometimes they'll share their email address on their page, or they'll share their agent's details. So if they've got their agent's details there instead of theirs, it's usually a good sign that they're the type of influencer you're going to need to pay to work with. And then be specific about how you want to collaborate. So what are your expectations, and how are you hoping to work with that influencer? Are you wanting them to come and review your product? And what are you giving to them in exchange for that? Is it free product? Are you offering them an actual fee for their time? So a lot of professional influencers these days, it is become their main income stream, and I've had actually quite a few influencers say to me, thanks for your offer of free products, but I can't feed my family with lipstick. So it's a legitimate way for people to earn an income now, and there is an expectation for a lot of good influencers that they will be paid for their time and their thinking around how to create great content for your brand. And then lastly, track results. So if you are working with an influencer, it's really important to talk with them upfront about the types of results that you are hoping for with any of their content. So that might be likes, it might be comments, it might be other forms of engagement. And if you are giving them something in exchange for something they might be producing, then you're well within your rights to ask for post analytics after you've worked with them. So asking them for comments like for things like how many people their content has reached, number of likes, and comments, and overall average engagement rates are quite good things to ask for. Next slide, please. So on these next couple of slides, I've just got a few really standard ways that you might work with food influencers, which I'm sure hopefully you've thought about. So firstly, events. Content creators and influencers love being invited to an event because for them it's a chance to show that they're out and about, and it's a chance for them to create live content for their own feeds. So it might be a tasting, it might be a product launch. All of those are the types of events an influencer will come to, often not for a fee. Secondly, competitions and giveaways. Competitions are probably the number one way to boost engagement on your own social media channels, as well as an influencer's own social media channels. So it can be a really win-win way to work with an influencer by offering them something that they can give away on their own feed, and then tagging you and making sure that traffic is also coming to your social channels. Next slide, please. Next, obviously, reviews, and this is Albert Cho. Eat That Food is obviously an Auckland based example, but he does get around the country, and he's definitely very polarizing, but he's probably arguably New Zealand's kind of biggest social media food influencer and content creator. But if you follow his content, his posts are very detailed in terms of his reviews, and they're very honest. So again, this comes back to getting to know an influencer, because some influencers, particularly in the food space, you can't really pay to work with them, but I think that's where relationship is really important. And then lastly, sponsored content. So essentially, if you're paying an influencer a fee to work with them, a really good consideration is actually adding a boosting budget for them to extend the reach of their content. So this usually shows up as sponsored content in somebody's feed. Again, a few things to think about. Is that content going to kind of fit with someone's feed if they haven't asked for that content to appear? If all of a sudden you've got someone's sponsored content appearing in your feed, it should be engaging. Otherwise, if the message is a really salesy message, it's going to probably backfire against the money that you've spent to have that as sponsored content. Next slide, please. Right, and now I'm going to hand over to Dylan, who's going to take you through some basics on food and photography and videography.
Cool. Yes, obviously all of us are on a different stage of our, content creation, food photography, videography journey. So we're going to go through sort of like a nice little baseline to start with, and then, if there's any questions after, we can get to more technical stuff and all of that. Next slide, please. Next slide again. Cool. So the reality is, the best gear to start with is the gear that you already have. Most smartphones these days are more than good enough, paired with some good lighting, to get some really beautiful content that's going to be exactly what you want. If you have a camera or if you have a bigger setup, then that's fantastic as well. But a baseline can be that smartphone camera you have, and then getting really creative with some good lighting. Whether that's your restaurant might already have some beautiful lighting set up, so that's great, or whether it's getting crafty, buying a lamp from Kmart or something, and then getting some stuff to bounce the light and all that. So next slide, please. So it is about getting creative with the gear that you do have, because what you have is going to do the job if you do it right. So it's making sure you're using your space in the best way possible, and setting up those budget lighting rigs, or using that beautiful downlight that you already have in your restaurant, and just framing the stuff up as best you can. And as well, it helps if you have friends, family, other staff that you can also get to lend a hand. There's the element of literally using their hands as a bit of a human element that social loves to see, that it's real. It's not just this food stylist piece that's been put together. It's someone who's actually there from the business putting it together. And as well, it's like many hands make light work, so it's just good to have extra people there helping you set up and all of that other element. Next slide. But hold the phone. Next slide. You've got to think about a few things first, because there's considerations about however you're shooting. Say you are shooting on a day where there is already people in your store. You've got to think about who's in the background. It hasn't happened to me, but there is the possibility that, there's someone in the background that doesn't want to be featured. And then if you haven't cleared that with them, and the content goes live and then they end up DMing you, you might have to take down because they don't actually want to be featured in it. As well, if it's paid content, is it being served to the appropriate audience? And I know Jaden will talk on stuff like that in the later session, but making sure that what you've made is actually going to the right people, and you're not just spending all this money willy-nilly to go to the wrong people who don't really care about it. As well as Joe touched on it with like ASA and alcohol and stuff, there's rules and regulations about all that. So you've got to make sure that ticking all the boxes there, and you're not going to get yourself in trouble and having your content taken down. And is it within the guidelines of different platforms? And so each platform will have its different guidelines, and just being familiar with those before you go and do anything. Next slide. So when you get to shooting, we'll start with photography and that sort of stuff. But lighting, you can get really crafty with it, and you don't have to spend a lot of money to get the results that you sort of want. It can be a nice natural lighting setup if you get some beautiful sunlight coming in from somewhere. It can be a little DIY setup with like a little board to bounce some light and your lamp that you've got. Or you can get pretty big with it, get a nice big softbox and a big professional light, and that's also going to help a whole lot. So it can feel scary, but you don't need to overcomplicate it too much. And it's about, like, again, what I was saying earlier, testing and learning. So it's about having your stuff framed up, play around with the light, see what's looking really nice for you, see what kind of shadows you're creating that look nice to you, see if you want it just fully lit up, and just experiment with all sorts of different things. And when you're shooting, it's important to be familiar with your camera settings, whether this is your phone or a bigger, beefier camera. So you've got to be familiar with, your exposure, your ISO, playing around with how light or dark your composition is and what is in there, as well as your focus and aperture. And you want to be, how blurry is my background, or making sure my product is in focus, or what I want is in focus, as well as the features as well. iPhones and Samsungs and all of that have some really funky features, and you don't necessarily need to use them all, but it's worth being familiar with some of them. Portrait mode on iPhone, for example, creates nice blur behind a subject, and there's all sorts of stuff you can play around with there. You don't have to use it, but it's good to know and good to be familiar with all of that. So composition is really important as well, because that's going to make sure that what you're putting out looks beautiful and shows up, and people don't just scroll past it because it looks really nice. And it's all about, there's a few ways you can go about it, and it's all about, again, the testing and learning, the playing around with stuff in different places, moving shit around, moving it closer, moving it further back, all sorts like that. And there's a few different guidelines you can sort of go off. The rule of thirds, which most of your phones should be able to put in there for you, that's a great one to start with. And then if you want it, you can get more experimental with all sorts of other sorts of layouts when taking stuff. And yeah, it's about stopping that audience in their scroll because it looks beautiful and it's framed up nicely, and making them stay to look at the content. But there is some no-goes with photography, and it's just worth considering. It's not like, it doesn't have to always be a no-go, but it's worth thinking about. Try not to usually zoom on your phone, because it does often ruin the quality and make it a little bit worse. If you can, just get closer, but if you have to zoom, you have to zoom, but that's a good one to talk about. As well, those features I was talking about, sometimes you don't need to overcomplicate it. Sometimes you don't need to use portrait mode for that super blurred background. It might just look better just having a nice, simple thing that still shows off a bit of what's in the background. And when you can, always shoot the highest quality you can. So if you're shooting video, shoot 4K, and then that sort of stuff. So more specifically into photography, making it beautiful. Firstly, the lighting can be really, really key and really change how whatever you're trying to show off looks. Making sure it's well lit or lit in the way that you want it to be is a really, really important thing. As well as playing around with your composition, trying a whole bunch of different angles and being closer, further away, extra stuff in the foreground, extra stuff in the background, mixing it up, getting a second opinion. If you think something looks nice but you're not too sure about it, or maybe there's a detail that could be changed, get someone else to come look at your frame, get someone else to look at what you've got set up. They might be able to point out something that you didn't actually notice before. Utilize your camera's functionality as well, where you can use different features, play around with your exposure, your ISO, play around with all sorts of different features that might come up with a better result. And shoot the shit out of it. Just take a lot of photos, because at the end of the day, if you don't use it, you don't use it, but it's better to just have a ton, look through, and get some really good ones from just shooting a whole bunch. Eventually, as you get further down the track, you get more familiar with it, you know what you like, and you know what you're trying to get. But just starting out, just take a bunch, fail, and it could work out really well. Wow, nice photos. Cool. So a few different accounts that, it's one thing I will preface is going out and seeing what other people are doing on social is a great way to get inspo and learn and really just know what you like and build your taste, as well as then thinking about how I want to then shoot. So there's a whole bunch of, you're probably familiar with so many other businesses in your area, in Wellington and Auckland, all over the country, that do brilliant social, do brilliant photography, do all of that. And using them as a base for inspo is like brilliant. Peachy, Cones Wellington, and Ombra are all like some beautiful, beautiful examples of social photography done really, really well. Next slide, please. So one other thing to think about is when you have an event or something you want to show off that is more about the social setting and maybe about getting people there, there's you kind of want to shoot a little bit differently, or just think about it in another kind of way. in terms of you're wanting to make people come to this event, you're wanting to bring the people in. So you've got to try to keep it candid, but at the same time, you can fake it. You do want to show those moments, but sometimes it's a little hard to be roaming around and get a real moment with people enjoying it. Sometimes you might have to ask them, can we do that again? Or can you guys laugh? Or can you smile? Something like that. And because those moments want to feel genuine. And like I was saying, when you're wanting to bring people into these events, sometimes the food is secondary, and you want to show the enjoyment that people are having, drinking your cocktail or eating the food, and having that moment where they're really, really immersed in it. And if you're just roaming around trying to get candid moments, maybe you might need to be a bit sneaky. Try not to be so overt and get caught taking the photo, because you might ruin that moment. And like I said earlier, don't be afraid to ask people to do something again if they did something really nice. And so burgers, if you're thinking of going to burger and entering into Burger Wellington later, there's a few different ways you can approach it. It's worthwhile you build your burger, but you want to find the best angle of it. There's always tends to be that one side that looks a bit worse than the other, so make sure you're using the best side of it and showing that off really nicely. If you can play around with framing it up with stuff in the foreground, background, or something else to maybe make that scene more exciting. If you're going to pair it with a Garage Project beer as well, stick that in the foreground or the background, something to mix it up in the frame. But you do still want to keep your background pretty simple, because it can be your restaurant. It can also be like a nice colored background, but making sure that burger is that key focus in it. Don't be afraid to get close up as well though. Sometimes what people want to see is that beautiful oozy cheese and the sauce and how good that looks. You can also get in some hands. Burgers always look great when they're in hands and before that consumption moment. And it's okay to get messy. Social audiences are okay with that, and they're totally fine with it. So if your burger is a bit messy because it's been, it's ready to eat, that's still great. If you're you're shooting, you're stuck, you don't know where to start, some good ones to always start with is your top-down shots, looking down on your burger or your food, going front on with your product or whatever, going with a making of moment, showing that last bit of sauce being put on or showing it being plated up, or then getting really close up and showing the real nice details of the food. And so videography, like we touched on, is super crucial nowadays in social, because some of these platforms are demanding you make great videos as well. But the principles of it aren't too different from photography. The same sort of stuff applies. It's just now you're adding that moving element to it, whether it's you moving, whether it's your subject moving, whether it's something in the background, foreground moving. So what you should change adding some movement, whether it's you moving with your camera, doing a little pan, moving in closer, something like that to mix it up. Looking into transitions. With TikTok and Instagram, there's so many things where they love transitions, whether it's cool funky ones where you cover the camera or a match cut or something else. But be thinking about the next way you can get from one shot to the other in like a way that's going to be really engaging. Try plan ahead, know what shots you sort of want to get, and have a little idea of what you're getting, because with video it can be a little more tricky, and especially if you've got moving parts, know what you want and know what you're trying to capture. Shoot at different frames per second as well, because if you want to go slow-mo, you want to shoot at a higher frame rate, but then if you're not too fussed about that, you can go down to a lower one, and it will affect like how it's looking, and it works different with your lighting as well. And when you're shooting for social, always shoot vertical. It's way easier to just take your phone and shoot this way up, rather than having to then crop it weirdly later on down the track because you've shot horizontal. Next slide. So making it beautiful, like I said, it's not too different from photography. You are just adding that moving element. So the same sort of principles apply. And so again, who does videos good? Go on social, be there, show up, have a look around and see who else in the area is doing it good, because there's all sorts of inspo you can find. And once you are on the platforms like TikTok and Instagram, you're probably going to curate your feed to show you really awesome stuff that you want to be seeing that's great inspiration. And again, just a try. Do a cool zoom, do a cool pan, pour a drink out, place the food down. There's all sorts of fun things to try just to get you started. So post-production, when you're editing, when you've shot it, it's all finished, now it's time to edit. there's a whole array of places you can start, and it's quite confusing, but I've just put down some of the nice basic baseline points to start with. So for photography, I would recommend going with Photoshop or Lightroom. Both are available on mobile for free and also have a desktop subscription as well, and they might take a little bit of time to pick up, but play around. It's definitely worthwhile going into an external program with your photos or with your video, because it might already look pretty good, but then there's extra points that you can add when you take it into the programs that just boost it ever so slightly. For video, you'd be looking to use CapCut, which is free on both mobile and desktop, and it's like super duper standard for mobile video, and it's really powerful, got a ton of tools, and it's really fun to use. Premiere Pro or After Effects, a little more complicated but still worthwhile, and those are both on desktop. Next slide. So being the Gen Z myself, I'd be lying if I said I did not learn so much from the internet. Probably more than I learned at uni, probably just as much that I learned on the job. YouTube and just the internet in general are just like such brilliant tools. And so just go on the internet, look up stuff on YouTube. There will be tutorials from the professional level stuff, and there will be for more basic starting out stuff. And it's just the internet in general is such a brilliant tool to use. TikTok as well. Like I was saying, once your algorithm is created, you're going to get exactly what you want to see. So there will be those tutorials. There will be sort of stuff to follow. That is a really good point for inspiration to go off. As well, the Adobe Creative Cloud has a ton of resources as well for you to go to with their programs if you are looking to go that way. Pinterest has so many beautiful photos, videos, such good inspo, as well as Instagram, following the people around you. Cool. So what now? Go shoot, go fail, and go learn. The bit you want to be shooting, it's better to be out there trying to make content, seeing how it goes, failing, rather than not shooting it at all. Just be okay with failing, be okay with making mistakes or having, some shit photos. That's all good, because the next time you shoot, you're going to get better and better and better. And to reiterate, the internet, just use that. It's such a brilliant tool for all sorts of, for your learning, for your inspiration, and all of that sort of stuff. And it's at the palm of your hands, and it was just going to be so useful for you when you're starting your content creation journey.